Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting. For those of you that don't know, my name is Lonnie Seifert. I'm the Superintendent of Schools here. I'd like to welcome you again to the second public meeting regarding the potential facilities bond referendum. At this time, I'm going to ask the school board members that are here to come forward. For those of you that didn't hear, the board made the decision to make these board meetings just so that there was no question about the open meeting laws and having a quorum of board members in a meeting. They chose to make it a special meeting, so I will ask them to call it to order.
Okay, 6:30, we'll call a special board meeting to order. Any additions to the agenda?
There are none. Move the agenda.
All right, motion is made and second to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have an agenda. Welcome everybody for showing up here tonight. I appreciate all the interest. I'm Phil Klink. I'm your chair this year for the school board. I'll let everybody else introduce themselves.
Marissa Lee.
Jason Haas. Mike Keane.
And Kelsey Odiar.
And board member Becky Voss from Fair was not able to make the meeting tonight. Before I get started with the slide presentation, just a couple of things. I would ask that if you have a cell phone, if you would silence it, please, just so it doesn't ring. If you want to record the audio part of it or video, that's fine. But I would just simply ask that you silence it so it does not ring. In the back of the audience, Amy, can you just step aside and in the back, we have Jennifer Thompson, our elementary principal. She has a wireless mic. So as we go through the presentation, if you have a question, raise your hand and they will come to you. Also, Amy Burns from our district office is over here with one, just because we want to get to you as quickly as we can. They will also look, in case I'm missing a hand, they will stop me and just simply say there is a question. Go from there. The last thing, obviously, we have a great turnout again, which I'm happy to see, people getting the information. Obviously, a very popular topic in the district. People have different opinions. I would ask that we be respectful towards those opinions, and we can respectfully disagree if we need to, but that's what I'm asking for tonight. The last thing I'm going to do before I start the presentation is I'm going to introduce some people that are here that have been involved or are supporting the district in this. And I'll start on my left-hand side. Steve Posh is here from GLT Architects. He is the architect that the district has been working with. Prior to this referendum, he was a part of the last one. Also here is Preston Early from R.A. Morton. Preston is a construction manager. Again, Steve and Preston were a part of the previous referendum to contract with the district, indicated that they got 2 chances to run it, and so we're going through this process again. And then the third person that is here, and he was at the last meeting, is Matt Hammer from Ehlers Financial Advisor. He works for Ehlers. And Ehlers is a company that we've used in the past, and we have an agreement with to help us with tax impact and some other financial advisory stuff. And so Matt is here representing Ehlers, and we'll answer some things when we get to the ag to school information. So at this point, I'm going to get started. Obviously, it's our second meeting. Wade Werner is up in front. He's our tech guy. Thank you, Wade, for being here, and he's the button man. So if you want to go to the next slide. Task force membership, voluntary participation. It was intended to be a cross-section of the district. We attempted to try and get representation from across the district, both in the area of communities and in the area of occupations, so that it at least covered as much as possible. There were 33 people that attended at least one meeting. You can see the breakdown as far as the community representation. You'll notice that after each community, it tells you how many voting members there were. Again, there were 33 that came to at least one, 29 that met the voting criteria, which was you had to be at least half of the meetings when the vote took place. You can see that breakdown. There were GFW school board representatives at the meeting. They were non-voting members. It varied. They were told about the meetings. They were not required to be there. They could choose to be there if they wanted. Was there somebody at every meeting? No. But they were there at times. And the task force was facilitated by Preston, Steve, and myself. Any questions? Okay. This is a list in alphabetical order of the 29 voting members from that task force. All right. The reason it was formed. I accepted the position with GFW in July and got some information and was aware, obviously before I was hired, that there had been a referendum, but got into it a little bit more once I got into the district. This was developed in response to a referendum that was run in November of 2017 to renovate 3 buildings. The responsibility of the group was to look at the facility needs, both structurally, looking at the building itself, and what educational programming could be provided in that space. Is it 21st century space? And so that's what their responsibility was. Look at that, identify the potential options, and make a recommendation to the school board. The question was posed early on in the process. Does the task force have any power to say to the school board, this is what our recommendation, you need to do it? They were told, no, it is simply a recommendation. The board would have a choice to look at it, accept it, decline it, tweak it, go totally different. As we worked through the process, and as I worked with the school board requested to see the final 2 options with them ranked in order with a rationale for the ranking. Okay? We're going to keep going unless there's some questions. Okay? The question came down to, does GFW School District need to complete a construction project to address the facility and programming needs? If yes, what are the options and where? When you look at that, there's really a few choices. You can stay in 3 sites and you can remodel to meet your programming and structural needs, which was, as I view it, that's what was thrown out the last time as a referendum. You can go to 2 choices or 2 sites and you can remodel, and that could be a remodel and an add-on to a building. It could just be a remodel of a building. It could be remodel 1, build a new. The 2 sites give you a lot of different options, and you'll see what they looked at as we go farther into this. Or you could go to 1 site and build new. I will add on to that, it's not on there, but I will add on, we did look at 1 site as a pre-K-12 in Fairfax because the land was large enough for a pre-K-12. So when I say build new, there is actually a little caveat to that in the fact that we did look at a remodel and keeping a pre-K-12 in Fairfax. Okay? Questions? Okay. What did the task force look at? They looked at these items: existing conditions, what's going on, enrollment trends, a community survey, the results from a community survey that was put out in May of 2018. They did facilities tours. They looked at tax implications on businesses and individuals. They looked at comparative estimates. So here's the project, here's an estimated preliminary cost. Here's another possible option, here's a preliminary cost. They reviewed 10 options, and there was discussion in both small group and large group settings. Okay? When we talk about existing conditions, these are the things that they looked at. Age of the buildings. 60% of our square footage in the district, right now this district has about a little over 294,000 square feet of building space in the 3 buildings. Out of that, 60% of it is at least 50 years old, and it's actually roughly at least 55 years old. One of the questions that came up at the last meeting is, what's the overall age? Well, that's really hard to put an age on. And so what we did put on our website is we put down a breakdown of all of our square footage and the age by decades. So there's been one 5,000 square foot addition at the high school for some locker rooms in the 2000s. Then it goes back to the 90s. And I don't even think there was anything done in the 80s. I think they skipped over that decade. Current square footage, as you can see, we have approximately 294,250 square feet. If you break that down, that is approximately 411 square feet per student. If you want to compare that, Renville County West, 222,000 square feet. Redwood Falls, 228 square feet per student, and St. James, 332 square feet. There was a superintendent in the area that was doing this, and they shared the results. These are just some of them. I have about 40 schools that he shared the information with all of us as superintendents. I believe out of those roughly 40 schools, there were 3 that had more than 400 square feet per student. We were one of them. What we're saying is we have way too much space. We have unused space. Looked at the operating costs. In fiscal year 2018, the cost for electricity, heat, gas, water, and sewer for our 3 buildings was approximately $237,000. If you break that out, that's about 80 cents per square foot. If you think about if we can shrink it a little bit, whether it goes to 2 sites or 1 site, there's got to be, we're not putting a cost on what you can save, but if you look at that, it would seem logically that 80 cents a square foot, you should be able to save some money. Maintenance project needs. There's tuck pointing, roofing, and that roofing is both replacement and just maintenance. Windows, we have 1960-some year windows. We have asbestos abatement that needs to be done, and it's the last project on here for a reason, but activities are a part of education. Our track at the high school, we are not allowed to host a conference meet based on the quality of the track at this point. And so that's another area that needs to be addressed. We also have some interior systems, air quality, electrical, plumbing, and heating, ADA compliance, fire protection. Our buildings were built a long time ago. Things have changed with entry. And unfortunately, this is my 33rd year of education. When I started, I never thought I would be dealing with some of the things that I am as a superintendent when you talk about security. And I don't think anybody can say it won't happen here. So we have to look at how can we provide secure, safe environments for our students to learn. And schools that are either remodeling or building new many of them have a dual entry. You can enter one, but then the next door is locked once the school day starts, and the only way you can enter is you have to enter through the main office. That's just one security thing. So there are some security issues that we would like to address. When you look at district primary and secondary maintenance projects, they equal about $16 to $17 million, maybe a little bit more. There is a list of them on the district website. One of the follow-ups to the last meeting that we had is somebody had requested that where does that $16 to $17 million come from? And so I had indicated we would put a cost projection out there on our website, which we did, which caused some questions. And I have asked Preston Early, our construction manager from R.A. Morton, to possibly address some of those concerns. The concern being that, well, this project and this project are exactly the same cost. And then this project is the same cost. And where do those numbers come from? So I'm going to let Preston address that at this time, if he would, please.
Thanks, Lonnie. In general terms, as we develop budgets at this stage of any project, they are very conceptual. So the design and the engineering is not completed yet, and so we're basing our estimates on the listing of items that we're looking to address, and we're comparing them with our market research on what costs will be and what kind of systems costs there would be typical for that kind of application. So as we develop this listing of items, and again, I think the list is published on the website where you can see what those costs are. Many of these items are priced out at this point as kind of general numbers. So as an example, two of the primary need items that are on the list are like new PA systems or public address systems, a new clock system. And in our research, working with past schools and working with different systems in those schools, those costs are, generally speaking, about the same cost when you look at number of classrooms and equipment that you put into those. So those costs end up showing on the report as being the same cost, but they're two different line items. And that it really can be true for a lot of the different things. And so we're not looking at this as an exact number. They are the ranges that we feel are appropriate for that cost, and that's why they end up being very similar, or in many cases on the list can be the same price. So, I guess that's a general answer to how some of those items become the same on the list. They do also include all of the what we call project hard costs, which are the unit costs of those items, plus any of the contingencies and permitting fees and associated fees that go with that. So it is the hard cost and the soft costs that go into the numbers that you'll see as a total number on those items on the spreadsheet on the website. Yes, sir.
Question on that. How could a flower $3,000 for around the flagpole?
Can we pass this down so
how can a flower bed cost $63,000 around a flagpole?
So the cost of that, it was labeled as a flower bed, but it was basically some structural things that are going around the flagpole too, with sidewalks and ramping. So it was listed as that on the spreadsheet, but it did get into a wider, descriptive. I think there was also a retaining wall that went into that line item. So, maybe as a descriptive that
There's other columns that talk about the sidewalk also. I can't remember what I'm saying.
I'd be glad to look at those and we can follow up with those items in a detail of how those costs were adjusted and the descriptives that go with that.
Because it's that high price.
Thank you for that, Mike. One other thing, I'm going to ask Matt Hammer from Ehlers to talk. One of the questions that came up is the concern with the amount of deferred maintenance. Why are our buildings where they are? Very quickly, we as a district get $380 per student per year for long-term facilities maintenance from the state. That adds up to about $266,000 a year is what we are given, roughly, maybe 270 per year. If you start looking at some of the projects that you have, it's really hard to do anything for $1 million when you have $270,000 in a year. Districts are allowed, and I'm going to say it, and if Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but districts are allowed to go ahead and do a larger scale project as long as they are willing to commit up to 75% of that amount per year to pay it. So if you wanted to do a $2 million project and wanted to say, okay, for the next X number of years, we are going to commit 75% of that $270,000 to pay it off. Okay, you're giving up 75% of that $270,000 over the next X number of years to get that $2 million project done. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt.
So districts have the authority to use their long-term facilities money and issue bonds with that money. And we did our analysis, which provides GFW. Can you hear me? Sorry. Did you hear any of that? Should I start over?
Start over.
Okay. So districts, there's a funding source called long-term facilities maintenance that districts have a couple options with to maintain facilities across the districts in the state of Minnesota. And those two options are basically you can use those dollars to pay as you go, which, like Lonnie said, brings the district about $260,000 a year. Or you can issue bonds with those dollars. But the limit for those principal and interest payments is $266,000 annually, assuming the pupil units stay the same over the life of that time. So when we did an analysis, and I know GFW has anywhere between $15 and $20 million of deferred maintenance that was identified, that would provide about $3 million total is what GFW could fund. And that would be considering a term of about 15 years. So in essence, those dollars from a long-term facilities perspective that are provided to GFW are only going to bring the district about $3 million of what would be needed to cover that total of $15 to $20 million.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. You can keep that. And simply put, what we do is we take what we have for dollars and we prioritize what has to get done. And we do what we can. Otherwise, the money has to come out of the general fund.
So what have you spent it on in the past few years?
We spent approximately $60-some thousand on this roof right here. We've spent it on asbestos abatement at the high school because tiles were starting to come out off the floor and they were trying to glue them down. We will post as many of the projects that we can come up, that we can list over the last probably 4 years. I know that was one of the questions that was posed by the task force, and we gave them some of those things, not necessarily in a handout, but it was talked about at a meeting. So I will get those things posted similar to what we did after the last meeting. We'll post some of those long-term projects that have been done over the last, let's say, 5 years.
411 square foot per student. How much of that footage is not used in all our schools?
The question was how much of the 411 square feet per student is not used at this time. Right now, at the high school, we have upwards of, I believe, 6 or 7 classrooms that are not being used at all. They will be used. Some of them will be used next year as we move our 7th and 8th graders over, but we have 7 or 8 classrooms not being used. I believe last meeting, Brian Thorstad, our middle school principal, said that they have roughly 15 to 18 classrooms over at the middle school right now, but they're not all used every day. I'm not going to try and put a guesstimate on it, but I can tell you that this building is the one building out of the three that is used probably close to capacity, or really probably even over capacity, due to the fact that we have our early childhood that is not behind a sealed door, a locked door, because we don't have a room to put them. And so we're moving our 4th grade to Fairfax next year, which will allow us to get our early childhood behind a secured door. This building would be the only one that I would say is being used to capacity. The other two, I couldn't even put a percentage on it, but we have a fairly large amount of space that is not being used. When you look at the two options later, we have an option that has 206,000 square feet, I believe, in it. That's the 2-site option. The 1-site option has 177,000 square feet. Both of those options we feel very comfortable with the square footage that we would have there. Amy, right behind you.
I wish you put up a complete list of this maintenance schedule you have here, because the figures are outrageous. Anybody that's in any building, these figures are so far from true. It's ridiculous. If I had a contractor like this, I'd fire him. He's terrible. You can cut a third of that off at least and do the same thing, because these figures are just crazy. Reshape a north parking lot, $364,000. You know what you can do with $364,000? You can do more than reshape a parking lot.
And I believe Preston addressed that.
No, you're going around and not telling the truth.
And I will say this, we could, as you said, you could trim 1/3 of it off. If we trim off 1/3, the quote is, I believe, 19 million. You can trim 6 million off. That takes us to 13 million. As Matt just shared, the most we can get in a 15-year period is 3 million. We still can't fix what we have.
Not when you get charged this much. No.
Even if we cut a third of it off, we could cut
a third, get a different bid.
We could cut a half
Get
off.
a different contractor, because its figures are inflated terribly. Terribly.
And the secondary needs are not even necessary.
And that is an opinion. Preston has answered the question earlier about where the crisis came from.
No, he didn't answer. He just danced around in a circle and gave us nothing.
3, 4 different bids, not one.
And until a decision is made, when we do a long-term facilities maintenance project, we don't go through R.A. Morton. We go out for bids and we get actual prices.
Another thing here with 80,000 to replace clocks. What do you spend 80,000 to replace clocks between middle school and elementary?
In what?
$80,000 to replace the clocks. 30,000 in elementary, 50,000 in the middle school. What are you doing?
We aren't replacing any of it because we don't have the money and we haven't gotten bids.
That's what's on the papers.
That's the preliminary cost, just like other preliminary costs that are out there. Until you actually go for bid, you don't have the price.
You don't even need 80,000 out of the clocks. You got wall clocks right now, leave them up there.
Okay.
Yeah, that 411 square foot per student.
Correct.
Is that just for this year, or is it the population going down or going up, or is it going to be?
You'll see the population. We have enrollment projections coming, and you can see it would probably go down. It might go down to 400 based on our enrollment. Our enrollment is not projected to drop that much, that it would drop it much.
If your enrollment drops, wouldn't that number go up?
Correct. Yeah. Well, if your enrollment goes up, it'll drop because you have more. If it goes down, obviously we're going to have more space than we need, and you will see as we go through what that does.
I just want to know what year 400.
me?
What year was that 411 meeting? You gotta have an idea.
That's this year. Yep, those are numbers that were generated this year. Go ahead, Lee. Those are posted on the website. Just wanted to put them out there. So that is GFW Elementary, both primary and secondary needs. You can see those. If I do have copies of them also, if somebody would like to take them, if you don't have access to the internet at home and would like a copy, I can get you copies. And the next few slides are the same thing. That's the middle school deferred maintenance. That's primary needs. Those are secondary needs. And then the high school primary needs and secondary needs. Question was about enrollment, and we'll get into that now. Just to let you know that one of the questions was, where are the students? Right now, if you use either a Winthrop address or in figuring the numbers, we use Lafayette also, 41.5%. For Fairfax, we use that. We also use Franklin addresses, 29.6%. Gibbon, you can see what that is. And then students that are coming to our district from another district that do not live in our district, we have 2.3%. One question that I wanted to address is, you will see enrollment projections here shortly, but you will also see, if you do any checking on Minnesota Department of Education, how the district generates money is by the students that you have. But the state doesn't weight them the same. It's not every student is one. What they do is, if you're in kindergarten, full day kindergarten up to 6th grade, you count as one pupil unit. Any students in 7th through 12th grade count as 1.2. So when I say that we have 693 students in our building right now, we may generate revenue of 700 and some per pupil units, because all of our 7th through 12th graders count as a 1.2. But that's how we generate our revenue. And so, just a clarification, we talked about our enrollment is this, our per pupil unit count, which is what the state generates our revenue on, is this, and that's why it's a little bit different. Enrollment, you can see what has happened since 2012. 799, 2013 to 2014, there was a 4.35% drop. And then there was a slight 2-student increase. You can see the history. Down to this year, 2018, we started the year at 696. And today, in looking, we have 694 that are enrolled. You can see the projections that are there. Yep. Yep.
What about the previous years? We don't have any indication of history, so it'd be nice to know that, to know future. So, just a question.
Yep. I know that was requested. I went back enough years so that what's going back is actually more than what's going forward. I can look at it, say 25 years ago, or whenever GFW came together, there was probably 1,100 students. How that changed. Things have probably changed in those 25 years though too, here. And this gives you a snapshot of roughly 15 years from 2012 out to 24, 25. The numbers for 24, any numbers after this year, obviously are projections. Those projections come from a software program that the district purchased through schoolfinance.com. It looks at the numbers that are reported by the district to the Minnesota Department of Education on October 1st. It looks at birth rates. in the county. And for this district, obviously there's a number of counties that are played into it. That program also has been around since 1992, so it has approximately a 25-plus year history of the trends in the district. So if a student open enrolls and leaves GFW and goes somewhere else, the state knows that. This program knows that, so they have a history of our open enrollment, both out and in, so that's factored in. These numbers come from that software program, and in it you can run it with projections, and it will give you a high number, it'll give you a low number. We chose to go to the middle. I'm not going to be overly optimistic and say, hey, it projected this, but I'm also not going to go to the very bottom and say it said this. That's where those numbers come from. We have open enrollment in the state of Minnesota. Students have choice. They can attend where they want. GFW is not doing well in that, obviously. What you have here is students, starting at the top, Civil East. Students from Civil East that are coming to GFW are 0. There's 43 going there. It's a net loss of 43 students. Same thing, New Ulm, Lafayette Charter, going down the line. I included all districts with students coming in. So you can see those are the districts that have students coming in. If you add up going out of GFW, you're not going to get 199. I didn't include all of them because the list is long. I will tell you there's 199 going out. So the net loss is 174 students. Total revenue, the state, students are priceless, but to the state, a student in GFW generates short of $9,000. So those lost students, 174 times that, we're losing about $1.5 million of revenue every year. Go ahead.
Where's your list of kids that are going to PLS? That's not included on this list, but that's a large number of kids, isn't it?
It is. Private schools, students, we do not get reports on that. We get public school reports.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there, so the number of kids that attend like a private school within the district, does the district get any money from those students?
We do not. No.
You get the tax money from those students, but it does not go to the private schools.
Excuse me?
Tax money does not go to the private schools. So
We get, if your question, let me rephrase. If your question is state funding, it is not state funding. If it's tax dollars, yes, we get tax dollars from the people that reside in the district. If you're talking state dollars, we do not get any state dollars.
Do you have any idea why, this number of students are leaving? Got anything to do with teachers, or we don't have the right sports, or what's the reason for it?
We sent out, as a district, we sent out letters to each family that is open enrolled out based on the report that we had. I received a response back from families, and I tried to make it as simple as possible. They could simply email me. I received a response back from families that would total approximately 10 students. I can't change. Mom and Dad both work in New Ulm, and it's easier to just take them there, and if an issue starts, I can pick them up and take them. We can't change that. There were some things that I looked at that said, you know what, can't change that. We're going to move the family farm in Bold. It's just easier to go over there right now because we're eventually going to be there. There were a couple of situations that, yep, we could probably address that, and we probably will. I don't think 10 people replying out of a total of 199 is a very good sample.
Do you have records of the children that are going to PLS or other private schools? like MBL, like those type of things, so you could reach out to those families and see why their children are going there instead of GFW?
You could generate that list, yep. Go ahead. Community survey was sent out in May of 2018. My understanding that it was sent out to all district residents, either through snail mail. There was an electronic way of doing it also. It was something that was completed, like I said, before I got here. When I got in here, I got the chance to tabulate it. And so the results, they were a piece of the information that the task force received. And the survey was intended to get a pulse. I don't think anybody is saying that it is the dead answer for what the communities think. It's a pulse. The results, 558 respondents. That is approximately 12% of the eligible district voters. As I shared in the last meeting, I read an article, Rochester put out a survey, they got 8,200 responses. That is 14% of their population. Surveys are rarely, I would say, if you were to check surveys results, if you got 25%, you should be jumping for joy. You can see back up. You can see the percentage out of the 558 that it is fairly close to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 from each community. The breakdown, a large part of this survey was completed by people 36 and older. I think it's roughly about 80%. You can see that a large part of it was filled out by people that do not have students in the district. And then you can see what the breakdown is if they had students in the high school, middle school, elementary, private school, or a public school that is non-district. Some of the key questions that we shared with the task force was, what advice would you give the school board regarding facility needs? And if you look at that, 55% felt that the plan needed to be revised based on the survey feedback and asked for voter support through a referendum. Then there were others, 19%, and some of the top answers on that was consolidation and then a new school. It was consolidation. It was reconfiguration of the grades, or it was 2 sites, and instead of just 2 sites, it was 2 sites here and here, and these grade reconfigurations. When do you feel the district needs to address the issues? The top 2 answers equal about 65%. That say as soon as possible, or 1 to 3 years for a time frame. About 17% didn't know. They weren't real sure, and then you can see there's about 17, almost 18% that felt it would be best to go later. And of the building options that have been considered, 38.8 build a new central location, pre-K-12 school, reorganize into 2 locations, pre-K-6 and 7-12, keep the existing. Then there was 11% that said other, please specify. Those were, again, consolidation, dissolve the district, improve the academics, and reconfigure. The committee asked to go on building tours, similar to many of you maybe. The committee didn't feel like they had been in the buildings to see what they really looked like. And so they wanted to take a tour. Some of you might be at activities, or if you go to a play and you see the auditorium, but you maybe don't see the rest of the building. And that's what they wanted to see. So we took one night per building and did tours. And you can see what some of the concerns were. Smaller inadequate teaching spaces or programs not used because of staffing issues, and that would be an example of an industrial tech shop over in the Fairfax building, or a fax room over where we don't have staff to teach it, because we have the fax teacher over at the high school, we have the industrial tech teacher over at the high school, and to find a part-time teacher, it's hard enough to find a full-time teacher to teach fax or industrial tech. To find a part-time or to share it schedule didn't allow. They found building maintenance needs, electrical, mechanical concerns, lack of sprinkling in large areas of the building, non-compliance with ADA, and then security at the main entrance. What if we do nothing? If we decide to do nothing? The pros, you maintain status quo, each community gets to keep a building, no new taxes. The cons, the cost of maintaining 3 buildings, open enrollment out of the district, continued insufficient use of staff, buildings continue to deteriorate because we can't keep up on the maintenance, general negativity and that feeling of how do we fix all this? State may come in and say, you know what, you need to do this. And then you lose the local control. Building security remains an issue, and you continue to have 3 of everything. You have 3 kitchens, you have 3 of everything in that you need in those kitchens. You have 3 gyms because you have 3 buildings. If that is the case, and mainly the school board will have to make some decisions on how to address the long-term facilities maintenance issues it faces.
So even though you have 3 of everything, you'll need 3 times the size of everything. So the kitchens will have to be bigger. The gym will have to be bigger to fit the same amount of kids, even though there's enough space for them already. So I don't know how to.
Technically, if you were to take the square footage of all 3 of our kitchens and our cafeterias, that square footage would probably be, I can pretty safely say, the 3 cafeterias we would have would probably be, if you add all that square footage up, would be larger than the cafeteria that you could put into one, or even that what you would have left. Obviously, you'd be taking out 1 cafeteria. If you went to 2 sites, you'd be dropping some square footage there.
I just wanted to bring up a couple points about the cons. So, just if we that it sounds like the general recommendation is to go towards like a single school, that really may not solve the problem of open enrollment out of the district. It just depends on how that decision is determined, I guess.
Correct.
And then also the general negativity. The negativity could become worse if the decision isn't made correctly. So.
Potentially, yep.
Regarding the 3 of everything, I got the impression that 3 gyms are always constantly being used.
No. They are not. This gym is open at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The high school gym is not used 7 periods a day. The middle school is not used throughout the day. There's just not classes in there the whole time.
Then it must be the extracurricular activities that are not necessarily being well managed.
Extracurricular. The gyms during the school day are not used all times. After school, the high school gym is used for volleyball practice in the fall. Middle school gym is used by volleyball after school for practice or games. Is there use of those facilities after school? Yep. But during the school day, are those three gyms being used constantly? No.
This message, or this question is for Preston. In our task force meetings, can you hear me?
Yep.
In our task force meetings, we talked about location and all the problems with the schools. Can he tell everybody which school is in the worst shape and which school is in the best shape?
I think it's a matter of opinion. I think you could, if you take a look at the deferred maintenance, this building has the least. It's also the building that's had the most work done recently. I'm not going to say this building is the worst, that building's the worst. Because one, I'm not a construction manager.
That's why I asked Preston.
Yep. And I don't know, if you want to touch it, you can.
I truly apologize for the mic issues, guys. These things were working a couple hours ago.
Preston, can you repeat the question? A lot of people back here did not hear that question, or what it's referring
If I understand
to.
the question correctly, which of the three buildings have the biggest need as far as deferred maintenance?
No, the question was, in the task force meetings, you said which one was the worst shape and which one was the best shape. So I'd like you to tell everybody that, because we never saw deferred costs in our meetings, so you need to tell us.
Okay, so in the task force meetings, the question was raised. In my opinion, I had stated that I felt that the Winthrop building had the most needs for not only deferred maintenance, but also some programming needs in how the building maybe was laid out and utilized. From a strict standpoint of cost, there's more needs and more cost identified for the Winthrop building. It is the largest of the buildings also, so that has part to do with that. Mechanical systems is all part of that. And as Mr. Seifert had mentioned that, from a cost standpoint, again, this building, the Gibbon building, has the least amount of cost associated with the maintenance. Again, it's the smallest of the buildings too. So, if you kind of look at just from dollar standpoint, from least to most, it would be Gibbon, Fairfax, and then Winthrop. Did that answer your question?
Why don't you give that to Amy, and you and we can share the mic. I get up here. Okay. One topic that has been talked about and been thrown out both in the survey and that the task force talked about, what happens if the district dissolved? The district would geographically be assigned to neighboring districts, so depending on your location, the district would be put out to Cedar Mountain, Sleepy Eye potentially, depending on your location, New Ulm, Sibley East, where, depending on where you're located. And so you would be assigned out, that district members would be assigned out to specific new school districts. There's no opportunity in that new school district for school board representation until seats open and they run elections. The district district residents are responsible for school taxes in the new district. They're also responsible for current long-term debt of GFW, which probably the three biggest pieces we have for long-term debt are a lease on buses, a lease on some roof projects that were done in 2011, and some energy efficiency project that was done in approximately 2015, 2016. That total long-term debt goes out. The buses go to 2022. The roofing project goes to 2026, and the energy efficiency project goes out to 2030 for a total of about, right now, between $1.7 and $1.8 million. And then the district would be responsible for maintaining the current buildings, demoing them, or attempting to sell them. I've got a question back here.
Lonnie, in case the school district is dissolved, you mentioned that it'll be absorbed by a different district. Who determines that? Is that determined by the state or by jurisdiction on a vote by the residents?
No, it is determined, actually, I haven't asked specifically how that's designed, but I did ask the question of an individual at the state Minnesota Department of Education, if it dissolved and let's say two of the three communities said, we want to come back together, could that happen? And his response is, there's no guarantee because the county would determine if it was dissolved, the county would determine that, the boundaries. So I'm guessing that if it dissolved, it would probably be a county decision as to where, so this is where you go. Honestly, I'd rather not have to ask that question. So, given that information, the next thing that the task force did is they started looking at criteria. What are the objectives? What's the criteria that we're going to use when we look at making a recommendation to the school board? There was discussion at the beginning about the dissolving, but it came to, I'm not going to say unanimous, but there was a strong feeling GFW School District is to continue. Okay? That is what they said. Provide the best possible education, both programming-wise, staff-wise, and student success-wise. Affordability and budget. Make staff time more efficient. Travel is a waste of time and money. They agreed, 1 or 2 buildings, which is obviously a change from the referendum the last time. Safety and security was a priority. Try to do something that will draw students and people to the communities. They wanted a high emphasis on career technical training. Not all students want to go to a 4-year school. We don't have enough people doing HVAC, plumbing, all of those things, sheet metal, fabrication. So they wanted to focus on that. Facilities long-term solution, something that's 20 years plus. Don't do something that in 10 years we're going to have to fix again, or do some more too. Unite the towns, GFW, not 3 towns, not Fairfax, not Gibbon, not Winthrop, but GFW. This was just kind of more of a want, I think. But having that student connectivity, one of the neat things that I get to see because I'm located over here is in the fall, Pat Henschus, our football coach, has arranged to have some of his football players come over, and I believe it's every Friday. They come over at lunchtime and spend time in the cafeteria and outside with our elementary kids at recess and just mixing with them. And more of a feeling of what can we do to do some of those things. And then lastly, probably one of the biggest things is educate the voters, which is why we're starting with this process right now. That being said, I should have stated this at the beginning. As I said, this is the second public meeting. We have a third one in Winthrop. Following that, the process will be a presentation to the school board. Obviously, the school board is at all these meetings, so they're hearing the information. You're given a chance to talk with them if you want. Reach out to them later. We will do a presentation to the board, and then they will determine the pace and the direction that they want to go. Go ahead. So, given those options, or those objectives, we had said, okay, you talked about 1 or 2 sites. Can you narrow it down for us a little bit? What are you looking for if you're going to look at 2 sites? And they flat out said they wanted to see all the options. And so what you have is all those options that were looked at with 1 or 2 sites. And so you've got a pre-K 6 in Fairfax, a 7-12 in Winthrop, and the cost $33.1 million, that's a preliminary. A pre-K 6 in Winthrop, 7-12 in Fairfax, just flipping them, 28.9. A pre-K 12, and we listed that as a remodel and as addition because it's not build new only. So that's 36.7. And then potentially there was talk about, what about turning this building into a pre-K 2 and then building or having a 312 in Fairfax, and you can see the cost there. Then there was discussion about what if 2 sites, if you remodel 1 and you build new for 1. Pre-K 6 in Gibbon, this land is not large enough. State would not approve making this into a pre-K 6 with the size that we have, so that would have to be a new site. And a 7-12 in Winthrop, you can see the cost. I don't need to go through all of them. And then really the only thing that's not flipped is on the bottom of that. Second one is a pre-K 2 here. And then there was discussion about possibly a 312 new site here in Gibbon. And then the last one is if you were to build a new and only new, a pre-K 12 site to be determined.
And that's not the land or anything, that's
That 50.8, and Preston, correct me if I'm wrong, is 46.5 for the building. It is 3.3 for site improvement, and it is $1 million to address the track football field needs in Winthrop. One of the things that I stated to the task force I could not support is if the district wanted to go to a 1-site location, I could not support saying, yes, I support putting athletic facilities at that site. We have a track and a football field that we can get fixed, and we have $1 million budgeted. Will it take $1 million? I don't know. But it's going to take more than that, I believe, to build a football field with stadium and everything at a new site. We have a baseball field in Fairfax that is fine. It's wonderful. Why would we not use what we have? And so that is what it costs. That's what it has in it. It does not include land purchase. It does not include the current buildings, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, Lonnie, at the last meeting, you stated that one building option most likely to be a central location, which we can all pretty much figure what you're saying there. I'm wondering if the infrastructure of Gibbon would handle a new school?
If the board decides that that's a direction they would want to go, or if they start talking about that, I would assume that they would direct us to find out if the infrastructure will handle that, or if it won't, and whether it be Gibbon or any other location, who's going to be responsible for making sure, if it's going to be in a community, who's going to be responsible for making sure that the infrastructure is there? Is that on the district? Is the city willing to say, you know what, we're willing to do this to make sure that you have it? I would say that would be a question that the board, if that's the direction they choose to go, would say, you know what, we need to know that. We need to have an idea of where that could be. And I will say, and you'll see it as we get to the recommendation at the end, the direction was, because the task force asked, in the last meeting, it got into, should they determine the location? And it was decided by the task force that that should be a board decision as to what the location is.
Yes, Lonnie, but if it's even an option, what do you think you'd present to them if it's even possible or not? If it's a possibility, you should be able to, otherwise it shouldn't even be a discussion, is my point.
Okay. And again, as I said, when we get done with the public meetings, we present to the board. They're going to give me the direction of pace and what they need and what direction they want to go.
The question is there any cost overruns figured into this, into our numbers? And so from the standpoint of, we would term those as contingency dollars that would be for unknowns that come up either through the planning process, the design process, or any site change. We do have contingencies built into this. They will vary a little bit by each project. There's a higher percentage of contingency established for renovation of buildings rather than new buildings. And so, but we do have contingencies built in. So in a new construction, we built in 5% contingency. And for a remodel, it was, I think, and actually in my models, I built both at 5%. So you were saying about the 50.8 million for one site. What exactly, I know you were talking about the building and stuff, but what about the inside of the building, the desks and stuff like that, lockers, et cetera?
Yep. That 46.5 million includes, I believe, a 5% furniture, fixtures, and equipment in it. Okay. Amy?
I'm trying to understand how in our maintenance list you have, you're so overinflated, but yet when you go to new schools and stuff, your figures, you're way underinflated. It doesn't make any sense where your figures are coming from. How can we trust your figures? And what's the cost of getting rid of these old schools? What do we do with the old schools?
Yep. And that will
be built new.
Yep. I will. That is part of the slides coming up. As far as the cost projections, and maybe I should have given Preston a chance to talk about his history, but Preston Aria Morton has been involved in a number of school projects. I think they have a history of being at or under. I know they worked in the Civil East project, and I know I did talk to Jim Amson over there, their superintendent. I believe they came in, and don't quote me on it, Preston, if you can speak for me, but I believe they came in at least $400,000 under budget on a $43 million project. They have about $400,000 that they're still trying to identify how they're going to use in their construction money. Go ahead.
Do you have any idea how much acres does it take to build a new school?
It would be recommended it be at 40 acres based on the square footage, correct? Approximately 40 acres.
Does GFW currently have 40 acres available that they own?
No. Nope.
How many acres do we own?
I have no idea. The only lot that, the only space, as I shared, the only space that we have that could take the pre-K-12 was Fairfax. And that's why we looked at that one. Yep. I'll say it, Amy, that's okay, yeah. If you just say it, I'll repeat it.
The dollar amount here, New Ulm built a new school 2, 3, 4 years ago. And theirs was about, I think it was 40 million, was it 44 million?
48.
48 it was. And I was wondering how many students have they got here to what they're talking about here?
Their high school, that was a high school they built, not a pre-K-12. And they're,
Repeat the question.
okay, his question was, New Ulm built a high school a few years ago. One, what was the price? Somewhere between 40 and 50 million dollars. I don't have a bottom line. And then his question was also, how many students was that for? I know New Ulm High School is larger than our pre-K-12. They have more than 700 high school kids. Yep. Others? Okay. Where did this lead the group? A large group discussions on all 10 options. Those options were presented on January 23rd. Pros and cons were developed and talked about as a large group. And then in that process, and their members were given a chance to vote. And the system that was used, and there's been discussion about it, and I'm pretty transparent when I talk. Members were given stickers. So Steve, our architect, had done schematics. A schematic is not what the building is going to look like. What it is Steve taking a look at every program that we offer right now and putting it into a building, whether it be 2 sites or 1 site, making sure that we have all the programs in whatever the plan is. Now, where that classroom is could change when we get to the actual building of it. We're just making sure that we have all the programs into the schematics. So he had done schematics of all the options. 10 options were on the wall. People were given stickers. They were told to vote for 4. They could vote for 4. They did not have to. If you were somebody that said, you know what, I only see 2 options that I like, I'm only going to vote for. That's all you had to vote for. The vote got done. There was some concern expressed that maybe people had put 2 stickers onto 1 option. Preston addressed the group and said, you know what, we just want to make sure 1 sticker on an option. You could not put 2 or 3 because that's the option you really wanted. Asked anybody if they'd put more than 1 on. Nobody indicated that they had. We would like to trust that as adults, they were being honest with us. And so the vote came out. Top 4 choices in order. 1 building on a new site, a pre-K-6 in Winthrop, and a 7-12 in Fairfax, a pre-K-2 in Gibbon, and a 3-12 in Fairfax, and a pre-K-2 in Gibbon, and a 3-12 in Gibbon on a new site. Those are the top 4 choices. All 4 of them had double figures numbers. Right off the top of my head, 19, 16, 13, 11 were the vote. Went away, came back for another meeting, February 6th. Okay, I'm going to stop before I go on. I'll take this question.
So why wasn't there another vote for the top 2 choices in the end? Was the way you speak the numbers, 2 school option, then 1 over a new school option, but yet you say building a new school is the #1 option. So when you actually tally the votes up, regardless of where the location of the two schools is, a two-school option had more votes than a new school. Correct?
Correct. But the choice that the school board wanted was the top two, which in my eyes is the number of votes. So, small group, we came back in 2 weeks after that first vote. We had small group, asked the groups to look at pros and cons of the 4 options. They were given the potential tax implications at that point, so that they could see what those were. Large group came back reporting, and again, now they had 4 choices, and we asked that they vote for 2 if they wanted to. Again, if you only saw one choice that you wanted, you could vote for just 1. That vote was held. Out of those 4 choices, it was 18 for the new site, 1 building new site, 14 for the pre-K 6 in Winthrop and the 7-12 in Fairfax. There were 9 for the 3rd choice, and there were 4 for the 4th choice. At that point in the meeting, we were about 2 hours in, and there was some discussion about, well, we have 2 choices. Some people felt it was pretty obvious that that 4th choice was quite distant. Preston did ask the question, what about the 9? That 3rd choice that had 9 votes, where do we see that? Realistically, I think people were ready to be done with that meeting at that point, and there was no discussion as to what happens to that 3rd choice. So some people left the meeting feeling like we were down to 2, some felt like we were down still at 4, some felt we were at 3. So when we came back to the next meeting, people thought that we had 2, some people thought we had 3, some people thought we had 4. Somebody else brought up an option that had been brought up before. And so then all of a sudden there were 5 discussions, or 5 options being talked about. Went through it, and we got to a point where, and actually at that meeting we did have a representative from Ehlers there that could answer questions for people that had concerns about the ag to school credit, and the tax implications, and how reliable is the projection, that whole thing. When we got done with that presentation, the question was posed, are we voting these 2 down to 1? Are we voting these 4 down to 2 now? Where are we going? When I was asked what I thought for transparency, the best answer to me was, you know what, let's go back, we got 4, let's vote it down to 2. And we'll have another meeting, and then we can vote it down to 1 and 2, rank order. There were committee members that said, why? I don't need another meeting, you've shared everything you need. We want to vote it down, get it down to 1 and 2. I offered the opportunity for anybody to say what they wanted to do. Did they want to go 4 to 2? The majority of the people said we would rather go 2 choices and be done. There was nothing else they wanted to hear. The vote was held because there were still those 4 out there, plus a 5th that had been brought up. There were 12 votes for the 1 site. There were 7 for the pre-K 6 in Winthrop and 7-12 in Fairfax. There were 6 for that being flipped, I believe. And then there were 2 votes for something else. At that point, the request of the board was to have the top 2 recommendations brought forward. In my eyes, the top 2 votes are 12 and 7, which are the top 2 listed there, when actually they're the 2 listed on the bottom. Pros and cons. Central location, of a one site. I don't need to read it. District is unified, attract students back, and these are pros and cons generated by the task force. They are not unanimous. As I shared at the beginning of this, everybody has different opinions. There were different opinions, obviously. We had a cross-section of the district. So some people agree with the pros, some people agree with the cons. There might be a difference of opinion. These are the pros and cons that were listed. But as you go through it, you can see what they are. Cons, high, obviously is the highest cost option. Not a school in each town, existing building plans. You know, what do we do with those? Central location, could it impact the support from the two ends? District may lose students, which is kind of tied to that. Need to purchase land. There were some task force members that didn't believe it would pass. There were also some task force members that did think it would pass. And so there was that, is it a pro, is it a con, what is it? But we listed it as a con, but there were some task force members that felt it could pass. Go ahead.
To address the busing, even if we have one central location or one location, we're still gonna do the same amount of busing, correct? And that is quite a chunk of change for us.
There will be, Greg Johnson, our transportation supervisor, and I have talked. I think there's this perception that there'll be a big chunk of money saved with it. I disagree. You know, I will say I think there will be some savings, and Greg would agree that there will be some savings. The bottom line is you're still bringing people from Winthrop, you're still bringing people from Fairfax, and you're bringing them here. Now, the argument would be you're not bringing them from Fairfax over to Winthrop, and you're not bringing them from Winthrop over to Fairfax. But you're still bringing them there to a spot. There will be some savings. I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be a huge amount of dollars. I never will say that.
Say, Lonnie. In the local paper last week, there was an article from Greg Olson that said that the school district would save $400,000 to $500,000. Are those actually true, legit numbers?
Those are not numbers that I have presented in any presentation. Those are not numbers that were presented as a task force. I don't know where those numbers came from. All right. 2 sites, pre-K 6 in Winthrop, 712 in Fairfax. Lower cost option, you maintain schools at the ends of the district, you keep kids in district rather than losing them. And again, these are all pros and cons that people look at. You may disagree with some of them, you may agree with some of them. No land purchase is needed in Winthrop. You have land to expand in Fairfax. Fairfax has cheaper energy costs. There would be staff and administration savings. Education opportunities are enhanced. The cons, you're still 17 miles apart. Not centrally located. There could be remodeling surprises. Buildings are still old, not as efficient, need to maintain 2 sites. You still have more square footage than you need. Obviously, as I said, you're still going to shrink it though. Just by, if that was the plan, this building is 64,000 square feet roughly. That comes off of your maintenance and your costs, if you can get rid of it. Or you at least get rid of it in some way, shape, or form. You still have issues of, you know, what's 10 years down the road look like? You know, or what are you doing in 10 years with the buildings that are still old? You have a limited teacher license that if I need a fax teacher at the elementary and they're at the high school, you still can't do much with that because of the distance and the travel. Remodeling during the school year. Most of you have probably seen it. Schools will shut down early. They'll shut down in May. They'll start late to allow a longer remodel, that type of thing. And then there's a possibility of continuing to lose students. Go ahead.
So
So I just had a question about the more square footage than needed. So if you're consolidating from 3 sites down to 2, and if there's a remodel involved, why would you still have more space than needed?
Unless you're gonna demo things in that building, you're still gonna have spaces that are not gonna be used. For example, if you were to turn Fairfax into a high school, the auto shop that is over there, if we truly want to emphasize career technical, that is going to have to be changed drastically for a fab. If you want a fab lab, if you want sheet metal, if you want welding, if you want industrial tech. So you're still going to have spaces that are unused because they're not suitable for, unless you're going to remodel and gut everything, which is not, that would not, that's not the plan. It's not, okay, we're going to gut the building and remodel everything. It would be, some areas could be just simply, we're going to put some paint on and make it look a little better.
Yeah, and that was part of my second question. So do we know enough about the figures? So when we're remodeling, what is actually being done to the buildings? And was that information disclosed when they were deciding on reducing the number of options? Like, what are we doing with the Fairfax and Winthrop building, or
and Preston, Steve, you guys can correct me, it was disclosed that it would not be a full gut. It was disclosed that it would be a remodel, and we would need to maybe add on at the high school. We would have to add on at Fairfax because of the need for those types of the industrial tech areas that we need. Do we know exactly? No. And part of, and I will say, part of what you're looking at, or what's being looked at, is how deep do you go into the things until the board says this is the direction we want to go. If they say, you know what, we'd like to look at a 2-site, all right, then that's where we start developing, this is what the remodel at Winthrop looks like. This is what the remodel at Fairfax looks like.
So if you don't know what you're going to do, how can you have a number on it?
Again, we're no different than any other district. You work with a construction manager, you work with an architect who have had experience in these, and they project for you. They're preliminary. These are not hard and fast. As I told the last group, if the board were to say, you know what, we want to go 2 sites, that's where we start breaking it down. And what the board would have to say is, okay, now we need to get more specific, because the question you ask when you go to the voters has to be phrased in a specific way. And we want to have specific numbers, and that's where we would start breaking it down. So when we say 50.8 million or 28.9 million, once the board says this is the direction we want to go, you need to generate more specific numbers. That's where Preston, Steve, and all the people that work for them start breaking it down. And maybe by the time they get done, that 50.8 million is 49.8 million, or it's 51 million, which then has to go to the board, because that will be a number that is used in the question. Same thing, if you went to 2 sites, they would break it down. It could become 28.1, it could become 29.4. And again, that would be something that we have to break down. We could spend hours and hours and hours digging into it, and the board may turn around and say, you know what, no, that's not something we want to even look at. Okay, then we will look at in depth the one plan that they say they want to go with.
Isn't one of the biggest cons of all of this losing teachers, losing janitors,
People losing jobs, we like.
Isn't part of this, the worst part of the cons, instead of being 17 miles apart, isn't it losing some teachers possibly? Good teachers that we do have, janitors that we have that care about the buildings? How do you know if we build one building that these people aren't gonna move and we lose those people?
I
That's the biggest con of everything.
can't answer the question of what people will do. I can tell you that in talking to our maintenance department, they anticipate, yep, you could cut a position or two based on the fact that the square footage. It could cost somebody a job. I could turn around and also, I could probably also argue that as a teacher, it might entice me to stay here because now what I'm working in is 21st century and I'm in industrial tech and I'm working with kids on something that is real life right now. And we're struggling with the facilities that we have.
What does 21st century mean? I don't understand. You keep
Yep.
saying that.
Yep.
We all have cell phones and iPads and everything. They just need a teacher. But we need teachers. It sounds like we're in an academic crisis and a monetary crisis, and we keep getting buildings thrown at us all the time. We could fix this maintenance stuff and work on the teachers, but I just keep hearing more buildings, more buildings, more buildings.
And both options that are being thrown out are actually less space. So it's not more buildings, it's less space, actually. And when you talk about 21st century, we're talking about having space for kids to work. And it's the STEM program that we're adding at the elementary next year. Science, technology, engineering, and math. It's those types of things. It's the CTE, the career technical planning, that gets kids ready for a 2-year program because that's what they want, not a 4-year program. Tax implications of a 20-year bond. Bonds can be 20 to 30 years, typically. Some districts, Civil East went 25, New Ulm went 25. A lot of schools go 20, I think is more standard. Very few go 30 that I know of. In fact, I don't know that I've read of a lot. You can see the implications on a $50.8 million. $100,000 home would be a $163 increase. A $28.9, $100,000 home would be $86. You can see that. The commercial, you can keep going. I'm going to turn it over to Matt now. One of the things that came out is the ag to school credit. And so Matt from Ehlers will talk about that because of the amount of ag land we have.
Good evening. As Lonnie said, my name is Matthew Hammer. I'm from Ehlers. And I work with a group of individuals. There's 7 of us on our team that strictly work with school districts across the state of Minnesota on financial planning as their financial advisors to look at tax impacts for potential bond issues and operating referendums, and specifically looking at the tax impacts of that specific piece of the tax levy. In this case, we're looking at a $50.8 million bond issue or a $28.9 million bond issue regarding the plans that we put forth here. A big piece that has come about in 2017 was this ag to school credit, which is significant for districts across the state that have a lot of ag land. And as part of the legislative process, this credit was a recognition by the legislature that there was inequity in the property tax system for farmers across the state of Minnesota or anybody that owned agricultural land. So in essence, what happened in 2017 is any school debt levies that were put on the tax rolls prior or in the future we're going to get a 40% state aid tax credit put on, which is paid by the state of Minnesota. And that credit is obviously paid through income taxes and is funded through the general fund formula at the state. So what that means for districts that have a large amount of ag land is it reduces the overall levy that the local district taxpayers pay. So in this case, if we can flip
flip forward. I'll point out a couple other things too. There's been questions by folks of, okay, is this permanent? Is it a standing appropriation? And I'll tell you that it is as permanent as any other tax law that we have in the state of Minnesota. And what's different about this than some other appropriations that come about is this is an open and standing appropriation, which that means the governor, the Senate, and the House would all have to agree to change the law. And currently right now, the only thing that's going on is at the state is any bill that's out there is actually to potentially increase it. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there's no indication this is going to obviously change in this cycle or in the future. And there's just a quote here from the Senate Majority Leader that basically reiterates that context that there is no intent to change that law this year or in the future.
I have a question over here.
If every school district in rural Minnesota would apply for the 40%, would the state run out of money?
It's already in place. So any
is their pot so big they can just absorb if every district did it?
It's a standing appropriation, so that means that the state of Minnesota is projecting funding that right now. So it's in place with districts across the state of Minnesota right now. And in fact, when it went into play, they went backwards and looked at any outstanding debt that was in play, and are obviously, when they're projecting out from year to year, are forecasting to make sure they have the resources to pay for it.
So the 40% does come out of our checks, our state income tax, right?
It is funded through state income tax.
So it's not truly a 40% savings then to a farmer if you're paying state income tax in.
Yeah, you could say that. So here's a look at the tax implications when we look at the $50.8 million option and the $28.9 million option. And we're breaking down residential, commercial, agricultural property here, and we'll get into a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides of what this looks like as you look at a homestead or qualifying ag land. And I want to point out that the ag credit applies to all agricultural land, so you don't have to have a homestead property to qualify. Any agricultural property outside of what we call the HEA, which is the house, garage, and 1 acre, qualifies for this ag credit at 40%. So any taxes that are paid have a 40% reduction. So when we look at a 20-year bond at 4.1% on the $50.8 million option. This is a breakdown of what it potentially could look like. There's many scenarios based on how your parcels are laid out and what classifications those parcels have. But in essence, what we're looking at here is if you had a 400 acres of ag land and it was valued at $7,000 an acre, this would be a potential look at what overall that tax bill could be on the $50.8 million option over a 20-year period at 4.1%. As you add to that number, obviously the numbers go up, and this is a look at what at 7,000 per acre on 800 acres would look like. So as we take a look at the effect of what the overall ag credit and the implications for GFW means is basically your properties that the debt levy would be spread over make up 76% of that property is made up of qualifying ag land. The state of Minnesota is going to come in and fund 40% of that bill. So you take 40% of 76%, and you come up with that the state is going to pay about around 30% of the overall debt service levies for the $50.8 million option. That equates to about $24 million over the life of the bond issue. So are there any questions in regards to how that lays out?
So that last slide that you showed with the amounts on it, that's an increase to what farmers are already paying on top of their taxes, correct?
Correct, that's a tax impact, so
Just
that,
for people
that
that don't understand that.
yeah, that would be the tax impact for this debt service levy or this projected bond issue. So I think the significance of this slide, when you take a look at it, prior to 2017, the local taxpayers in this district would have paid another $24 million on top of another $24 million that now, as we move forward under current law, that the state of Minnesota is picking up. So that's significant in the grand scheme of the overall tax impact to the taxpayers of GFW.
Did Sibley East or Normal School District get that 40% tax credit?
Anybody after 2017 is eligible. So any qualifying ag land is eligible for the tax credit. What do you say? Was that an operating levy or was it a debt service levy?
Sibley East did both get building projects.
Yeah.
And then Sibley East would have missed it because theirs was 14.
Yeah.
But it's right.
Yeah, so now it goes into play. So whatever the local taxpayers passed at the time, their tax bill has come down for whatever the ag owners were paying.
So 36 million is on the farmers, and we're gonna expect farmers who are gonna lose $166 an acre for corn and another $88 for beans an acre, and we're still gonna ask them to pay that much money on a $50 million bond. That's just something to think about.
And Matt will be around afterwards. If anybody would like to have conversation with him regarding ag land or any specific question. You have. What you have on the next few slides is the Minnesota Department of Education provides schools with a document, or you can go to their website and find a document. If you're looking at questions to ask yourself if you're thinking about a remodel or a build new. And so these are some of the questions that MDE recommends you look at. And you can see what they are. I don't need to read them to you. But just some questions, and they would say, if you're answering yes to a number of them, then we'll get to, Wade, let's just hold up. We got a question over here.
So this list of questions, before when you were asked to state what schools were in the, actually with Preston, I believe his name was, asked, you said you didn't want to touch that, but so who answers these questions before we move on to something like this?
I would pose it to the board.
Okay.
Amy?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the 50-year-old building. You know, that's probably, so it's an MDE recommendation that buildings that are older than that be replaced. Is that, like, is there any other guidelines that they offer?
And I'm not even saying that they recommend you replace them. They're just saying that on average that is old compared to what is an average within the state of Minnesota.
Because I mean, there's, you know, outside of, like, we have the data for public schools in Minnesota, but there's also like other institutions of higher learning, like universities that definitely operate out of old buildings. We have hospitals that operate out of old buildings and they can still make it work. You know, just as long as we don't have crumbling infrastructure, we don't want any buildings that are unsafe for our kids. But, you know, that's just something I want to know.
And so again, these would be questions that we would want to look at, and it would be a document that the board would get before having to make any decisions. Some decision points. When you start looking at remodel or build, things to look at, the fiscal build value in building new, the fewer unknowns, the 21st century learning, all those items. You know, scarcity aid, yep, we get aid based on, you know, where we're located and how spread out the district is. Still we wouldn't lose that by going to one site or even two sites. Looking at population density, looking at busing that was talked about earlier, you know, how much are you going to save? But their MDE's recommendation is if your renovation is approaching or approaches 60% of your replacement cost, they would recommend that you replace the facility. Some other things to think about. Which option provides the best long-term solution? District's educational needs. Which option provides the best value for each taxpayer dollar? And which option is the best long-term investment in students, staff, and communities? Based on that, the recommendation is that the GFW School Board consider taking a bond referendum to the authorized voters of the district to build a new pre-K-12 school facility at a site to be determined by the school board. Again, that is a recommendation that the board consider it. That is the number one choice, the number two choice being the two-site option. When you talk about existing facilities, there was discussion about work to identify potential community uses for them, attempt to sell. Winona they closed 2 elementaries last summer, roughly a year ago. They put their buildings up for sale with a realtor. That's how they did it. Other districts have worked with in their community. That would be the feeling that the task force had, is if we have to shut a building down, whether it be 1, 2, or 3, look at how you can get rid of them and they can still be used by somebody. If not, the next thing was demolition. They don't want the communities to have a cost with maintaining or keeping them. Projected cost for demolition is approximately, if it was all 3, it'd be roughly 1.7 to 1.8 million. If it was this building alone, it'd be about $400,000 to demo. The other recommendation I shared earlier is athletic facilities and fields. Use the present outdoor athletic sites, and that would include the $1 million that is in the budget right now to get the track football field in Winthrop up to what it needs. So with that, I am done with my presentation. We have a question here. We'll take that, and if there's any other questions, while he's getting ready to ask that, I do want to leave that up there. That's my contact information. You're more than welcome to call me, email me, set up a meeting and sit down and talk, whatever. Go ahead.
Farm real estate pays for how much of this bond issues? I don't care what one it is. What percent do they pay?
That was 46, I think, or
That's after you figure the ag credit in.
Correct.
And that's not in stone. So without that, we're what, almost 80%, 75, 80% we're paying?
I think it was like 77%, 76.9.
Do you feel that the ag land is represented on this board correctly, because we don't have very many people on the board, this committee, that are farmers or own real estate. It looks pretty lopsided to me. I don't think we're getting a fair shake on this.
And I will say that when I tried to build it, I offered opportunities for others to be on it, and I was turned down. So there are ag people on it, and if you were to look at that makeup, I think the makeup of this committee was much more a cross-section of the district than the previous, and that was my goal.
Yeah, but it's not the cross-section who's paying for it. It's like putting up a double garage and the neighbor tells you where to put it and how to design it, and you're paying for it.
Did you say something? No, okay.
So who's gonna pay for the referendum, the voting?
That would be the responsibility of the district.
So how much that gonna cost us?
Roughly, because, well, and part of it will, if there is a referendum, and again, if the school board hears a presentation and says, you know what, nope, we're not doing anything, then and if there is a referendum, it would depend on when the board decides to run it. It has been discussed August or November. I would say right now, given our time frame, August is out the door, and November is still an option. That would be a special election because there are no elections this year. If you waited until November 2020, it could be run with a general election, which would save you some costs.
How much it cost? What's
But
it cost?
I've been told between $10,000 and $15,000.
How are we set for operating funds? Is there a chance that you're gonna come back in a few years and say that we need an operating levy?
GFW currently has an operating levy in place through the year of 2022 that was approved, I believe 4 or 5 years ago. It is right now $1,026 per pupil unit, I believe. 1,026, I believe. And if you've been reading anything, we are not a rarity. That number is about average for schools out in this area. Some of them are at upwards of 1,600. Some of them are at the bare straight 300 per pupil unit. Will we come back? I'm never going to say no. I would like to think that we can get ourselves in order. One of the things that we do have on the agenda for the April board meeting is a budget reduction for next year to try and balance. That has not been done in this district in the past. And that needs to be addressed, and that's being addressed as best we can at this point.
But it is a real possibility that if this were to go through, you'd come back in a few years and
There's a possibility that we would renew the operating levy that we have in place right now.
Okay.
It is a possibility. Yep.
We have to remember why we had some of these operating funds. That was when we stole the money from the schools and for some of his that money.
Correct. And the whole school financing piece, it's a huge, you can argue that the state has not done their job of supporting or funding education the way that they said they would.
So I know GFW, I mean, we're in a unique position, but really we're not. Like, this is rural Minnesota, unfortunately. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can learn from other districts, such as Sibley East? I mean, they couldn't consolidate their district either. They went with they're in 2 buildings, that's what I'm saying.
Yep.
And I know there's other districts too. I mean, some of them have decided to centralize. but do we have enough information from those districts, like what has worked and what were some of the surprises that came out from them? Like, so if you centralize, are we at more risk of losing students? You know, will students go to a closer district just because of their proximity? Is there anything that we can learn from them? That's all I'm asking.
The only conversation I've had is since the task force got over, because that was a question that was posed by somebody after the fact. I have a connection to a principal in Rushford Peterson, which is in southern Minnesota, and they went from 2 buildings to 1 approximately 3 years ago. He's been there for approximately 4 years, and just asked about that. And you know, did I ask about law students? Yep, they did not lose. Did they gain a huge number? You know, I think there's this assumption that if you build this new building, and you're going to have all sorts of new kids. Did they get some additional bodies? Yes, they did. Did they get such a number that they weren't ready for it? No. Were they able to provide what he felt was a better program? Yes, because they could build things into that. Now, again, that's one example. Have I talked to others? No, because I don't have connections at all the buildings. I think in 24, 25, it was at approximately 677. Yeah, 677 in 24, 25. Question was, have we had any discussion with Buffalo Lake Hector? The task force asked that I connect with Cedar Mountain and with Buffalo Lake Hector superintendents to see if they have any interest in consolidating, pairing, sharing, any of that. Cedar Mountain flat out said no. If they were going to go anywhere, they would go Redwood Falls because of the distance. And Buffalo Lake Hector indicated they have no interest, and they're in a little different situation over there. They have their superintendent is not being brought back. So when I talked to him, he was pretty point blank, and they have some other goals for their district other than coming this way. And so neither one of them has an interest in becoming a larger district with us. Other questions? The last thing, before I bring the board back up to adjourn the meeting, is Ms. Thompson, our elementary principal, is available. That if, you know, like the task force member, if you would like to see parts of the building that what it looks like in the elementary, she'd be happy to take you on a walkthrough and show you both the remodeled rooms that we have, you know, that in that section, and then maybe the difference between the older model part of it too. But again, my contact information is up there. Also, these 3 gentlemen and I will be around after the board adjourns the meeting for anybody that has specific questions for us. So if the board would come up. Yep, oh.
I just want to say that at the last meeting, you brought up that if someone has a question regarding their egg land, they can personally get a hold of Ellers, and they will go through your specific piece of land.
And if you need that contact, I know somebody had asked at that meeting what's their role. If the board makes a decision that they want to run a bond referendum, whether it's 2 sites or 1 site, Ehlers will do a couple of different things. One, they'll put a tax calculator on our website, which would allow you to do a tax calculation for residential and commercial. And then they will also provide an email or a phone contact, an email and a phone contact, so you have a choice where you could actually give them name, parcel, county, and they will run a report of what that tax impact would be for you. And if I remember reading right, Matt, 1 to 3 days is your turnaround on that, roughly? Yep. So with that, I'm going to ask the school board to come forward so that they can adjourn the meeting.
business, school board members? Okay. All right, motion made and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, just going show and talk around.